Get out of my house, Dad. My oldest son's voice hit like a hammer. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. The house I'd painted with my own hands, where my wife, Marilyn, took her last breath, had turned into a battlefield. They yanked the keys from my hand and threw back the cold line. The deed is in Mum's name. It's ours now. I went numb. I stepped onto the porch in a light drizzle with only a worn wallet and a yellowed wedding photo. At 70, I started over behind a torn driver's seat and a shaky steering wheel, hauling strangers for a few bucks to feed myself. Every night I looked in the rear view and saw an old man with silver hair and sunken eyes. A man who once had everything and now had only breath and memories. Until another rainy afternoon outside the hospital, a well-dressed old man grabbed my hand, trembling, and asked, "Arthur Cole, was he your father?" The moment his tears fell onto my hand, that's when my life began to open a door to a secret my father took to the grave. If you're still here, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Every comment helps this story reach more hearts. And if it moved you, give it a like so others can find it, too. 6 months earlier, I still had a home. A small house in the suburbs of Nashville, with a front porch full of yellow chrysanthemums. Marilyn planted. She loved getting up early, making coffee with 2 spoonfuls of sugar, and calling me by the tender name, Harry. Every morning the smell of coffee mixed with flowers and the old jazz on the radio, that used to be the sound of happiness. Then cancer came fast as a winter wind through a door cold and quiet. In less than 3 months, Marilyn, my partner of 45 years, left this world. And I was an old man wandering inside for silent walls. In the first days after the funeral, my 2 sons, Caleb and Damon, stopped by. Now and then they brought canned food and said a few words about taking care of Dad. But there was something distant in their eyes, like they were looking at an obligation, not a person. I tried to lighten the mood, told stories about Marilyn. But whenever I said her name, their eyes dropped, not from grief, but impatience. One Tuesday afternoon, Caleb came with a thick stack of papers and a tight smile. He set the pile on the kitchen table and spoke in a flat voice. "Dad, this house is in Mum's name. She's gone, so the estate gets split. Damon and I decided to sell. We've got tuition and a mortgage to cover, and you don't really need this place." I froze. "So, where do you expect me to live?" Damon, the younger one, avoided my eyes and answered softly, "A small apartment. Your social security should cover it. You don't need much, just a place to sleep." I swallowed hard. They talked gently, but every word felt like a pinprick. 45 years I worked non-stop from mechanic to floor supervisor, scraping together money to raise them, pay for school, weddings, cars. Now they told me I didn't need much. 3 weeks later, I moved out. No send-off, no hug, not a single goodbye. They kept even the chairs where Marilyn and I watched TV every night. I took only an old suitcase, a few clothes, and a wedding photo faded by time. The room I rented was on the 3rd floor of an old building with peeling paint. The smell of damp and cigarettes mixed together. It was so small I could touch both walls with my hands. The bathroom was shared by 3 people. Hot water, on and off. At 70, I had to learn to live from scratch. And for the first time in my life, I felt unnecessary. My social security check was only $400 a month. Just enough for rent and a few loaves of bread and some canned beans. At first, I kept the habit of making coffee every morning. But eventually, I stopped. Not because I ran out of money, but because there was no one to share the smell of coffee with. One morning, staring at the electric bill, I knew I wouldn't last long. I needed to do something, anything. I went online and signed up to drive for a rideshare app. Nobody wants to hire a gray-haired old man. But strangely, I was approved in just 2 days. Maybe God still had a sliver of mercy for me. On my first day driving, my hands shook on the wheel. Nashville streets were busier now. Cars more modern, and I felt like a relic in a young world. Passengers climbed in, some friendly, some cold. I kept my head down and tried to hide the smell of joint cream. Each ride paid only a few dollars, but I worked 12 hours a day. Every night when I shut off the engine, I looked in the rear view and saw a stranger, gaunt, exhausted, eyes once bright, now gray like smoke. I used to have a family, a house, a loving wife. Now I had a ripped seat and a worn wheel. Sundays used to be joy. Marilyn roasted chicken. The smell filled the kitchen. The boys watched football and I watered the lawn. Now, Sunday was just another workday. I drove families to brunch and listened to them laugh while I felt hollow inside. Time passed. By the 4th month, I was a familiar driver in the app. I wasn't afraid of driving at night anymore, and I no longer felt ashamed when people called me the old Uber guy. Maybe people get used to being forgotten. Then one Thursday, in a light rain, my phone pinged with a new pickup. City General Hospital. I usually avoided hospitals. The antiseptic smell took me back to Maryland's hospital bed, but it was cold, and I had only $10 in my wallet. I accepted the ride, thinking just one more trip. I pulled up to the patient pickup. 5 minutes, then 10. I was about to cancel when an older man in a gray suit, navy tie, and black cane stepped out the door. His white hair was neatly combed, his shoes polished to a shine. He looked like someone important, not my usual passenger. I hurried to open the back door and shield him from the rain. But when he looked straight at me, the world froze. His face went pale, his mouth fell open, and the hand holding the cane trembled. I thought he was having a stroke, and reached to call staff when he whispered, his voice shaking like wind. "Is your name Harrison Cole?" I nodded, a little confused. "Yes, I'm Harrison." He raised a hand to his mouth and tears spilled out. He repeated Cole, Cole like a spell. Then he choked out a name no one had said to me in years. Arthur Cole. "Do you know that man?" It felt like someone squeezed my heart. "Arthur Cole is my father," I said. "But he passed more than 30 years ago." The old man sagged into the seat, shoulders shaking. I heard him whisper, "Thank God, I finally found you." When he looked up, his pale eyes were wet, staring at me with a mix of joy, regret, and guilt. He spoke slowly. "I'm Bernard Whitlow. I've been looking for your family for 60 years, and I still owe a debt. A debt your father left with me." I sat still, heart pounding against the patter of rain on the windshield. I didn't know who he was or what he meant, but something in that trembling voice wouldn't let me turn away. He met my eyes in the rear view, pleading, "Please don't take me to the address in the app. Take me to my office. There's something I have to show you, something I've kept for 60 years to give back to the Cole family." I hesitated, then nodded. I didn't know that nod would take me to a dusty safe where a secret had slept for half a century. And from that moment, my life would flip. Bernard sat quietly in the back seat, thin hands gripping the cane like it was his last lungful of air. When I asked for the address, he looked into the rear view, voice low and rough, like a man who'd waited a lifetime to say one line. "Not the app address. Please take me to Whitlow Textiles headquarters, downtown financial district. I need to show you something." I paused. Whitlow Textiles was a familiar name on billboards and highway signs, one of the biggest textile companies in the country, with factories as far as South America. I didn't understand why a man like him needed to see me, an old rideshare driver, just because of a shared last name. But there was something in his eyes I couldn't refuse. I nodded and started the car. Outside, the drizzle turned the city lights into soft streaks across the windshield. The ride was nearly silent. I heard his cane tap the floor in a steady rhythm, like time ticking. He stared out the window, face tired, but eyes strangely bright, the look of someone about to keep a promise he never forgot. Nearly 40 minutes later, we stopped before a steel and glass tower. The Whitlow Textiles Incorporated logo gleamed on the roof. I stepped out, opened his door, and shielded him from the rain. The moment we entered the lobby, a young receptionist stood and smiled, bowing slightly. "Good evening, Mr. Whitlow. It's been a while since you've come in." I froze. Whitlow. He was the chairman. Bernard nodded. "Good evening, Sarah. No need to notify anyone. I just need an hour." As he spoke, I noticed everyone in the lobby watching him, with a mix of respect and worry. He motioned me along. We took a private elevator with walnut paneling and a faint wood scent. He pressed floor 18 president. The car slid up so smoothly, the only sound was a soft hum. Standing there, my heart thudded. What on earth tied my father to this man for 60 years? The doors opened straight onto a large wooden door, with a brass plate. "Bernard Whitlow, President." He pulled a small key from his vest pocket, turned it, and eased the door open. I almost stopped breathing. The office was huge. Footsteps echoing on the floor. Dark wood walls, high ceiling, floor tasseling windows looking over rainy Nashville. In the corner sat a massive antique desk with leather-bound books, an old photo frame, and a brass pendulum clock that had stopped. It felt like walking into a museum of one man's life. Bernard pointed to a brown leather sofa by the window. "Please sit, Harrison. I won't take much of your time." He walked to a large seascape painting behind the desk and lifted it down. Behind it was an old green safe with a black combination dial, paint flaking off. He turned, eyes a little wet. "I swore I would open this safe only when I found Arthur Cole's family. Today is that day." Before I could ask, he spun the dial. The metal clicked slow, sure, ceremonial, like he was reopening the past. A clean clack. The door swung, and the smell of old metal and paper drifted out. Inside was a worn brown folder, a few black and white photos, and a stack of yellowed stock certificates. He lifted them carefully, set them on the desk, and motioned me over. I stepped in, hands trembling. He opened the folder and pulled out a photo. Two young men stood before a small factory, grinning in the sun. I recognized one right away. A young Bernard in a white suit, arm thrown up like he just won something. The other, I could barely breathe. That face, that nose, that look. My father, Arthur Cole, 40 years younger than I am now. I heard my own voice shake. My father, that's him. Bernard nodded, eyes far away. Arthur Cole, the man who saved my life. He leaned back and began slow and steady, like reading a memory carved into stone. In 1965, I was 30, newly inherited a small mill from my father. I was young, arrogant, thought I'd turned it into an empire. I was wrong. A partner cheated me. Contracts collapsed. The bank cut my credit. In a month, I lost nearly everything. Those nights, I drank and counted the days to bankruptcy. One night, he went into the bar by the mill, where workers hung out. He sat at the counter in his suit, head down in despair. A man sat beside him, hands greasy, clothes stained with engine oil, and asked quietly, "You don't look okay. What's going on?" Bernard looked up and saw an honesty in the man's eyes that was hard to believe. He told him everything. Debts, creditors, losing the mill. When he finished, the man simply listened, then said, "My name's Arthur Cole. I work at the garage across the street. I don't know finance, but if you really need it, I have some savings. Not much, but it might get you through." Bernard gave a rueful smile at the memory. I thought he was drunk or joking, who hands money to a stranger he just met in a bar. But 2 days later, Arthur showed up. He withdrew $30,000, his entire life savings. Money he and his wife were saving for their first house. Arthur put the cash on the desk and said simply, "Take it, save your company. Pay me back when you're profitable. But remember, don't break your word." Bernard slowly pulled out a yellowed napkin and handed it to me. On it, shaky handwriting, ink smeared, 30% of the company, a promise between men. Bernard Whitlow and Arthur Cole, 1965. My throat tightened. 30% in a company that later became huge. Bernard went on, voice trembling but clear. "I used the money to cover urgent debts. 6 months later, we landed a big military contract. We survived. When I went to repay Arthur, the garage was closed. They said he'd quit and moved. I searched everywhere. Tax records, hospitals, police. No one knew where he'd gone. It was like Arthur Cole vanished." He paused, staring at the photo, finger-rassing my father's face. "I searched for 60 years. I hired detectives, ran ads, dug through old records. No one found a trace. So, I kept my promise. I didn't sell his shares, didn't spend a dime. I waited until I could hand them to someone with a Cole name." The room fell quiet. I looked at the folder, then at him, a man who kept a promise longer than half a lifetime. Rain slid down the windows. City lights glowed like distant memories. I placed my hand on the photo, feeling like I was touching my father across time. Warmth, a legacy, a story I'd never known. Bernard smiled faintly, almost a whisper. "Harrison, this is my debt, and it's the gift your father left you," even though he never said a word. I couldn't speak. I just sat there and listened to my heartbeat between two generations, one who left quietly, and one who kept a vow through 60 years of waiting. As for me, Arthur Cole's son, I knew from that second a new chapter had opened. And the past I thought was buried was rising, bright in the present. I stayed there, eyes fixed on the yellowed napkin and the black and white photo. Every shaky stroke of my father's handwriting still felt warm. 30%. Those 3 words felt familiar and distant, like a crack opening between present and past. Bernard stood, went to the big desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a fresh folder sealed with a red ribbon. He loosened it and slid it toward me. "This is the latest statement," he said, steady and slow. "Your father's 30%. I've kept it in this safe for 60 years. No sale, no transfer, no dividends taken. All earnings have been held in a separate account under estate of Arthur Cole." I opened the folder. The first page was a stock certificate on heavy paper with Whitlow Textiles Incorporated's embossed seal. Bernard's young signature sat in the right corner, bold, confident. The next page was a thick financial statement. I read to the last line, and my heart stopped. Current market value, $3,284,000. $32 million. I shut my eyes. Sure, I'd misread. 32 and 6 zeros. After that, a number I had never seen and never dared to dream of. I sucked in a breath. My chest burned. and my head rang like someone had tapped it hard. Sorry, what? I stammered. This money was my father's. Bernard nodded. Yes, and now it's yours, Harrison. I'm just keeping my word. I looked at him, a man who kept a promise for 60 years. Deep wrinkles on his face, but his eyes were kind and bright. There was no bragging, no pride, only relief. I said softly, barely believing myself. I always thought my father was poor all his life. He never said a thing about this. Bernard gave a sad smile. I wondered that too. I hired people, ran ads, even mailed letters to dozens of states. No one knew where he went. A friend at the post office said Arthur quit and disappeared without leaving a forwarding address. Maybe he wanted a quiet life away from business. Some people value peace more than money. That line made my heart sink. I saw him again in my mind. Rough hands, oil-stained shirt, quiet but warm eyes. He lived so simply, I sometimes felt ashamed. Turns out, behind that poverty was a choice. A man who trusted enough to hand over his savings, then quietly disappeared. I stared at the old photo, throat tight. Something surged through me, not just shock, but late regret. All my life, I thought my father was just an anonymous mechanic. I never knew he had the vision and kindness to save a company, and now someone else was the one to tell me. Bernard laid a hand on my shoulder, thin but warm and firm. Arthur gave me a chance to live. Without him, Whitlow Textiles would have died in 1965. I kept his stake like the company's soul. I knew one day he or his family would return, and I'd hand it all back. He paused, looked me in the eye. Brighter now. And today, Harrison, that day is here. No one deserves it more than you. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Words weren't enough for the mix of awe, gratitude, and grief. I whispered, almost under my breath, "What do you plan to do with the shares?" Bernard smiled slightly. "Not me. You. All the certificates, the shareholder record, the legal files will be transferred to your name. But first, we have to complete verification." He pressed the desk phone. "Lena, please have Martin Greer come to my office right now and bring the transfer paperwork." In under 5 minutes, the door opened. An Asian woman in her 40s, brisk and neat, walked in with a tablet and a stack of documents. Behind her came a middle-aged man in a black suit, moving calmly with a briefcase. Bernard introduced us. "Harrison, this is Lena Park, my executive assistant of over 20 years. And Martin Greer, the company's chief legal counsel." Both shook my hand, friendly but professional. Bernard continued, voice low but firm. "I want to transfer Arthur Cole's 30% stake to his son, Harrison Cole. He is the rightful owner." Lena paused, then nodded and started tapping notes on her tablet. Martin took off his glasses and spoke carefully. "We'll need government ID, a copy of your birth certificate to prove paternity, and Mr. Arthur Cole's death certificate. Then we'll update the shareholder registry. Everything goes through audit for full compliance." Bernard nodded. "Start immediately. And Martin, arrange in advance so he can get settled. I won't have anyone named Cole leave here with an empty wallet." I jerked in surprise. "No, I don't need..." But Bernard raised a hand and gently cut me off. "Don't refuse it. This is a small part of what belongs to you. Call it the first step so Arthur can rest easy." Lena quickly opened her laptop and typed a few commands. She said, "Mr. Whitlow, the advance of $50,000 can go out today. If Mr. Harrison agrees to provide his account number." I sat there like someone who'd wandered into a dream that felt too real. From an old driver living on a few bucks, now someone was offering to transfer an amount I'd never seen in my life. I just nodded, my hands shaking as I wrote down the same old account number that had only ever held a few hundred. Martin carefully gathered the files and signed a receipt. He said, "This advance will be transferred within an hour after full verification. All shares and associated assets will be retitled to you. He'll officially become the company's second largest shareholder." I went numb. Second largest shareholder, 30%, 3 numbers, 30%, 60 years, $32 million. 3 strikes of lightning crashing into a life that seemed already finished. Bernard spoke softly. "Calmer now. I don't have much time left, Harrison, but I'm at peace because the greatest debt of my life is finally paid. You're not only inheriting assets, you're inheriting a story about kindness. Use it in a way your father would be proud of." I bowed my head. My throat was tight, but my heart filled with something bright and aching, like someone from the other side was smiling, laying a hand on my shoulder, and saying, "You see, Harrison, kindness never disappears. It just waits for the right time to come home." Outside, the rain had stopped. Nashville's nightlights reflected through the glass, falling across a black and white photo of 2 men, my father and a young Bernard. One gave everything, the other kept his promise. And me, the man who thought he'd lost it all, now sat between them, quietly accepting the legacy of trust. And I knew from that moment on, my life would never be the same. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the rooming house felt strange. The drip of a leaky pipe, a bus screeching to a stop outside, even the wall clock ticking off each second. I lay there staring at the yellowed ceiling while 3 numbers looped in my head. 30%, 60 years, 32 million. I had never seen a number with that many zeros. I was afraid I was dreaming. Afraid that by morning, everything would be back to the way it was. Just an old phone, a worn wallet, and a few coins in my pocket. But when dawn came and the first light cut through the blinds, I bolted up, opened my phone, and logged into my banking app. The screen lit, and there it was. A small line that made my heart skip. Current balance, $50,000. I touched the screen lightly, afraid it would disappear. It didn't look real, like someone had sent it by mistake. I read the sender again, Whitlow Textiles Corporation, and sat in silence. For the first time in years, my eyes burned. People say money can change your life. I think gratitude is what truly does. I want to hear from you when luck knocked on your door. What did you do with it? Did you keep it to yourself or share it with someone else? Tell me in the comments. Doesn't have to be long, just honest. And I'll read every single line. I put on my old coat and took the bus to the nearest bank branch. The young teller greeted me with a polite smile. But when she saw my paperwork, she looked up surprised. Would you like a full statement, sir? I just nodded. When the long strip printed out, I saw the line, incoming transfer. $50,000 in solid black ink. No doubt anymore it was real. I asked to convert a portion to cash, about $1,000, just to touch reality. Holding the fresh bills, the smell of paper and ink made me shiver. For years, I'd counted 5s and 10s, now brand new, hundreds sat in my hand. I slipped them into my wallet, my palms still damp with sweat. When I stepped out, the sun had broken through. Across the street was a small diner, red brick, a faded sign. I realized I hadn't eaten breakfast and went in. It wasn't crowded. The smell of roasted coffee and toast filled the room. The waitress asked what I wanted. I said words that felt strange in my own mouth. Soft scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, and a hot black coffee. Add a slice of buttered toast, please. She smiled and jotted it down. I waited, rubbing my thumb over Marilyn's old photo in my wallet. When the plate arrived, the steam warmed my face. Golden eggs, the smell of bacon, coffee curling up in little streams. I cut the first bite, chewed slowly, and tears fell. Not because of the taste, but because I felt human again. It was my first decent breakfast, after months of living on cold bread and canned beans. When I paid, I left a few extra dollars for a tip, something I hadn't done in 3 years. Stepping back into the sunlight, I felt lighter. Maybe God had sent me a chance not just to live, but to live with dignity. I ducked into a clothing store nearby and bought 2 shirts, a pair of slacks that fit, and simple leather shoes. The total was under $200, but to me, it was the formal wear for a new beginning. I wanted to look presentable to meet attorney Martin Greer that afternoon. His office was on the 10th floor of a gray stone building on Broadway. When I arrived, the secretary led me straight in. Martin met me with a firm handshake and kind sharp eyes. He motioned for me to sit, poured coffee, and started with a calming smile. Congratulations, Harrison. I've received word from Mr. Whitlow, but before anything is finalized, we need one very important step. Identity verification. I nodded. Martin pulled out a file. Your father, Mr. Arthur Cole, left a paper trail in old employment records, Social Security, housing registrations, medical files. But to formalize the inheritance, we need a DNA test, cross-stewed with a sample stored by the hospital from the year he passed. I exhaled. I understand. How do we do that? He buzzed for a tech. A woman, in a white lab coat, came in with a small kit. She spoke gently, had me open my mouth, swabbed the inside of my cheek, and sealed the sample. The results will take about a week, Mr. Harrison. I don't expect any issues. Martin nodded and handed me a few more pages. This is a temporary authorization, allowing us to act on your behalf in the transfer process. And this is a basic family history form. Just the names of your parents, siblings, spouse, children, all your personal information. I signed my hand unsteady. It felt like I was signing not just a paper, but a new chapter of my life. Martin stacked the pages neatly into a folder and clipped it with a gold fastener. Everything is on track, he said. We'll contact the hospital to match Arthur Cole's old records. I've reviewed them. The timelines, addresses, jobs, even signatures line up. I believe the DNA is just the final confirmation. I looked at him and felt relief. He leaned forward, voice slower. But one thing, Harrison, when money comes, especially a lot, people tend to act on emotion. I've seen many folks stumble after a windfall. My advice, keep quiet and be patient. Tell no one. Don't rush to buy. Don't lend. Wait until everything is complete. I nodded. I understand. I've lived empty-handed long enough to know what money can destroy. Martin smiled softly and patted my shoulder. I believe you'll respect it, and I believe your father Arthur would be proud. We shook hands and I left. Outside, the afternoon sun was a deep gold. The sidewalks busy. I walked slowly, hearing only my heartbeat like a drum. At the crosswalk, I stopped before the tall glass tower where Bernard worked. Sunlight flashed off the metal so brightly I had to squint. Yesterday I was an old man in a damp room, worrying about the light bill. Now I stood at a crossroads. Poverty on one side, a crushing responsibility on the other. I understood then maybe this money wasn't just to save me from being poor. It was a debt of kindness passed from my father through another man's hands, now returning as a test. On the way back, I paused by a small storefront and watched young couples pass by. Soft music drifting from a cafe. The world didn't know what was happening to me, and I liked it that way. A treasure is worth more when it stays quiet. That night, I returned to the old room. I made real coffee, not instant. As the smell filled the air, I smiled. It had been a long time since I could enjoy a hot cup without counting coins. I sat down, opened the statement again, and looked at 50,000 glowing under the warm light. It wasn't just money. It was a sign that a new life had started, and a weight I had to learn to carry with gratitude and clarity. Outside, a breeze stirred. I lifted my head and whispered to myself, from here on out, Harrison Cole is not the same man. But deep down, I also knew when luck arrives late, it brings light and a lesson on how to hold on to yourself in the storm of fate. 3 days after meeting Martin, I got a call at 7:00 a.m. His name, Martin Greer, lit up the screen. His voice was rougher than usual, slow, heavy, in a way I felt instantly. Harrison, I think you should know. Mr. Whitlow was admitted last night. Doctors say late-stage lung cancer, metastasized to the bone. He's very weak, but alert. He mentioned you. I sat silent, hearing my heartbeat in my ears. Just days ago, he'd stood straight in a gray suit, voice clear, eyes sharp. And now, does he want to see me? I asked. No, he said. Just to pass a message. That afternoon, Martin called again, his voice lower. Bernard phoned his family last night and told them he'd repay his debt to Arthur Cole. Then he fell asleep. This morning, he passed peacefully. His last words were, "Thank you, Arthur." I collapsed into a chair. The room shrank and went still. I'd never felt a loss so strange, like losing a relative I'd known less than 2 days. A stranger who changed my life. I cried. Not loud sobs, just quiet tears sliding into my collar. I saw his eyes opening the safe, his hands shaking, but steady, his fading voice firm when he said my father's name. That evening, I went to the funeral home, as Martin asked. A small, simple room. The photo was black and white. Bernard, smiling gently, bright eyes behind silver frames. No lavish wreaths, just a few white lies. Some family, a few company folks. Lena, his assistant, recognized me, shook my hand. Eyes red, he said before he went, that if there's a next life, he wants to see his friend Arthur again. I stood before the casket and laid a white lily. In my head, his last words repeated, "I just kept my promise." And I whispered back, "Thank you, Bernard. Thank you for remembering us." 3 days after the funeral, Martin called me in. When I walked in, he smiled gently. "The DNA is in, Harrison. 99.9% match. No doubt you are Arthur Cole's son." I held my breath, staring at the printout. Match. 99.9%. Simple letters carrying a heavy truth. Everything Bernard believed. Finally proven. My nose stung. My throat tightened. Martin went on calm and careful, as if not to push me over the edge. "We've sent the confirmation to the legal board. Now we can officially transfer the 30% stake in Whitlow Textiles to your name." He opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. There it was, the latest shareholder list. Hundreds of names, but on the second line, right under Whitlow Family Trust, was Harrison Cole. I stared at it for a long time. A plain name I'd seen in phone books and utility bills. Now on the shareholder roll of an international company. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Martin smiled, reading my thoughts. "Don't let the number scare you. Think of it as a reminder of your father's kindness. From now on, you're part of that legacy." He handed me a thick envelope. "This is a formal invitation from Whitlow Textiles Board. They'd like to meet you next week to introduce the new shareholder. The meeting's at headquarters, 18th floor. I'll go with you if you'd like." I took the envelope, my hands shaking. I flashed on myself, hunched over a steering wheel, waiting for a hospital pickup just weeks ago. Life can turn so fast, it makes you dizzy. Martin leaned back, voice turning serious. "One more thing. You now have choices about that stake. Sell, hold, or sell part of it. I advise you not to rush. Let it cool. Let your emotions settle before doing anything. People with new money often act immediately. That's the biggest mistake." I nodded. "I get it. I don't need anything except a quiet life. My father chose peace over money. Maybe he was right." Martin smiled and rested a hand on the folder. "He was. And that's probably why you deserve this." I left his office as Nashville slid into late afternoon. Fall sunlight slipped between glass towers and across windows. I walked the avenue with the envelope in one hand and an old photo in the other. The photo Bernard pulled from the safe. In it, my father and Bernard stood shoulder to shoulder, grinning in front of the old mill. I stopped at the same cafe where I'd had breakfast 3 days earlier. The smell of baked goods drifted in the air. I sat in my corner, set the photo by a hot black coffee, looking at those two faces, one gone, one newly departed. My chest up. I whispered, "Dad, maybe I understand why you left. You chose to keep your heart clean instead of chasing money. I used to resent you, thought you were weak. Now I know it was a strength you have." I opened my phone and reread Martin's last text. "Transfer account complete. Congratulations, Harrison." Below it was a screenshot. Harrison Cole, 30% shareholder. I don't know if my father can see it, but I believe he'd smile. That night, I went back to the rooming house and didn't turn on the light. I opened the window and let the fall air in. On the table, my father's photo with Bernard lay beside Marilyn's frame. Pale moonlight washed over both, one black and white, one faded color, like two worlds touching. I sat for a long time listening to the wind and my own heartbeat. A line of Bernard's kept echoing. "Kindness has a longer memory than money." It's true. Money can vanish. Fame can shift, but kindness doesn't. It travels a wide circle, sometimes taking half a century, and still finds its way back to the one who deserves it. I folded my hands and spoke softly, unsure if it was to Marilyn, my father, or Bernard on the other side. "I promise I'll use it the right way. I won't waste what kindness entrusted to me." The breeze nudged the curtain, carrying the smell of wild daisies from a little garden across the street. I closed my eyes and pictured Marilyn sitting beside me, smiling, a coffee cup in hand, whispering, "Harry, heaven still looks out for us." And I smiled, not the smile of a man who came into money, but of someone who just found his faith, something lost far longer than any fortune. I left a damp rooming house on a Monday morning. My old suitcase held a few outfits, a wedding photo of Marilyn, and a folder with my name on it. That place had kept me alive, but it wasn't where I could keep living. Locking the door for the last time, I stood still, looking through the small window where I'd listened to rain on the tin roof, and wondered if my life would ever brighten again. A cab took me to a new apartment complex on Nashville's north side, an 8-story cream building with a guard on duty, keycard entry, and a courtyard full of lavender. I rented a 2-bedroom, one for me, one as a small memorial room for Marilyn and Dad. When I stepped in, the smell of new paint and pine, the natural light, I closed my eyes for a moment. After so many years, I could finally breathe like a man who had a place to go home to. The living room had a big window facing the park. The open kitchen gleamed. The stainless fridge reflected a face both familiar and new. That first night, I slept on a brand new bed, a thick, flat mattress. No more dripping pipes, no mildew, no arguing through the wall. I slept all the way through, deep and calm, like I'd forgotten what worry was. Waking up, my back didn't hurt. My shoulders felt light, and there was only one feeling left: peace. The next morning, I opened the window. Sunlight poured into the kitchen. I walked to the nearby supermarket for the first time in years. I bought fresh food, a red cut of beef, bunches of greens, ripe tomatoes, a few apples and oranges. When the cashier scanned, I realized I didn't need to count coins. I just smiled, thanked her, and carried the bags home with an easy, unhurried step. For lunch, I cooked something simple: beef with onions, vegetable soup, and a cup of black coffee. I set it by the window and played the old jazz Marilyn loved. The sweet onion and the coffee smokiness made my eyes sting. I used to think small things like this: a proper meal, a quiet home, were luxuries. Now I know real luxury is simply living true to yourself. By afternoon, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. An old man with silver hair and more wrinkles looked back, but the eyes were different. No failure, no shame, just the calm of someone who had walked out of a storm. Each time I looked in the mirror, I reminded myself, Harrison, don't forget, live decently. No showing off, no revenge. Money is an opportunity, not the goal. That evening, I read Martin's email. He wrote, if you keep the full 30% annual dividends, or about $2 million, enough to live comfortably, without touching principal. If you want to invest further, I can introduce a few trusted advisors. There were 3 names. I focused on the second. Trevor Hastings, 55, an independent advisor who'd worked with big companies in Chicago. The line under his name said, prioritizes capital preservation, avoids risk, practices ethical investing. I liked him right away. The next morning, I called. Trevor's voice was low, steady, and easy, like someone who'd seen a lot. We met at a cafe in the financial district. He was tall and lean, a bit bald, round glasses, polite. He shook my hand firmly and smiled. Martin told me about you and your father's story. I have to say, not many people inherit something both beautiful and heavy. We talked for over an hour. He asked about my habits and goals. I said I didn't need a mansion or a yacht, just peace. He nodded. Good. I like clients like you. But to keep your peace, you have to learn to keep quiet. Don't tell anyone about this, neighbors, old friends, even distant relatives. When people know you have money, they'll come, and not for love. I listened. He went on, and don't make big purchases for a few months. No luxury car, no second home, no lavish trips. Let everything settle. Get used to your new self first. I thanked him before leaving. He set a hand on my shoulder. You know, Harrison, money doesn't make people better. It magnifies who they already are. I believe you'll choose well. Back at the apartment, I opened a small wooden box I'd brought from the rooming house. Inside were my father, Arthur's old papers, Social Security, a few black and white photos, an invoice from the garage, a faded birth certificate. I spread them across the coffee table, carefully arranging them like piecing his life back together. Beside them lay the photo of Dad and Bernard, grinning in front of the mill. The legacy of trust. I took a sheet of paper and wrote a few lines like a letter to the past. I understand why you were silent. I'll live like you. No showing off, no forgetting a debt. I'll use this to do what's right. I folded it, tucked it into the box, and set it next to Marilyn's photo. Every morning, I got up early and made coffee in the new kitchen. The smell drifted into the sunlit room. I sat alone, taking small sips, remembering Marilyn up before dawn, teasing me for making coffee too bitter. Each cup now is a quiet memorial. The sadness is still there, but it doesn't crush me anymore. It's become a quiet part of life, like a shadow on the wall. It doesn't vanish, but it no longer weighs me down. In the afternoons, I walked the park, watched kids chase each other and older folks exercise, and thought, I've come back from the darkest place. I'm not ashamed of age, poverty, or failure anymore. I can lift my head not because I'm rich, but because I kept my dignity after losing everything. At night, I glanced in the mirror once more before bed. The 70-year-old man smiled slightly. His eyes were kinder. I put a hand over my heart and whispered, thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Dad. I'll live decently in every sense of the word. Then I turned out the lights. The apartment rested in warm, honest quiet, like a mirror reflecting all that's past, reminding me each day, money can't erase pain, but it gives you the posture to live kindly if you know how to bow your head to kindness. A week after our first meeting, I went back to Trevor Hastings's office. Early winter in Nashville. The wind was crisp, and the smell of dry leaves slipped through every corner of the streets. Trevor welcomed me into a wide room, hung with countryside landscapes, warm yellow lights spilling across an oak table. It was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking second by second. He offered me coffee, then opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. Harrison, I've reviewed your entire financial file. Now, we need to discuss something important. The plan for those shares. On the screen were 3 columns, blue, yellow, and gray, each standing for a different option. Trevor pointed to them in turn. First option, sell the entire 30%. You take in about $32 million after taxes. Cash right away, no strings attached, but you lose all dividends in your voice in the company. I nodded, listening. Second option, keep it all. As it stands, you'll receive about $2 million in dividends each year, possibly more if the company's profits rise. The only risk is the market. The value of the stake can go up or down. I stayed quiet. Trevor took a sip of coffee, eyes narrowing slightly, voice slower. And the third option, what I call the hybrid plan. Sell half or less, so you get a large pool of capital, while keeping a long-term stake. I proposed you sell 15%, or half the value. You'd receive about $16 million in cash. And the remaining 15% would bring in roughly $1 million a year in dividends. He looked at me, then gave a small smile. This is the one I think fits a man like you, someone who values stability over show. I nodded, but my chest felt heavy. 16 million stunned me, even though I tried to stay calm. I'd never had more than $5,000 in my account, and here someone was talking to me about millions. Trevor understood. He leaned in and kept going, like soothing a confused child. Harrison, don't think of this as too big to handle. The hard part isn't how much money you have, it's knowing what to do with it. I've seen too many people lose their way after a windfall. He opened another sheet. Safe capital allocation in bold. My proposal has two parts. 1. $10 million goes into a conservative portfolio, treasuries, an S&P 500 index fund, and a small portion in REITs for steady income. 2. The remaining $6 million stays as a reserve. Long-term living costs, insurance, and anything you want to dedicate to charity or personal goals down the road. I looked at the charts. Clean, clear lines. Trevor explained each number slowly, without fluff or pressure. He talked about a personal trust protection against lawsuits, scams, or legal risks. We'll set up a trust in your name with me running the investments, and Martin handling the legal side. You'll also need a will to prevent disputes later, and we'll add a personal liability policy in case someone decides to sue. A chill ran through me. You think people would do that? Trevor smiled lightly. When folks hear you have money, there's always someone who wants a slice. Being careful isn't being paranoid. It's respecting the work that got you here. He went over the Cellone roadmap. Transparent, public, prioritizing long-term investors so it wouldn't look like a sudden dump. All transactions will go through an intermediary to keep you entirely anonymous. No media attention. No old man got rich overnight story. I exhaled in relief. I'd only ever wanted a quiet life. I didn't want headlines, phone calls asking for cash, or my sons who had pushed me out, showing up with plastic smiles. Trevor studied me for a long moment, then said, Mr. Harrison, every signature today won't open the door to indulgence. It's one more step into responsibility. You're no longer a man thinking only of himself. You're holding the legacy of two men, Arthur and Bernard, and I believe you'll do right by them. I bowed my head and took the silver pen he offered. As the first line of ink touched paper, it felt like I was signing a promise, not to a lawyer or a bank, but to my own conscience. Martin Greer came in midway with a stack of legal documents. He read each section in a steady voice. Every agreement has been vetted. Nothing shady. Whitlow Textiles has approved buying back the shares at market price, and your name will remain confidential in all public filings. I signed each page slowly, missing nothing. Each time the pen paused, I thought of my father. I imagined what he'd do if he were alive. The answer never changed. He would choose what lasts. My father, the man who emptied his savings to save a company, asked for nothing and just wanted his word to mean something. Wouldn't want me to waste the luck he left behind. When I finished, Trevor stood and offered his hand. That's it. The two halves plan is officially underway. Most of it will take about 3 months to wrap up and allocate. You can rest easy. I shook his warm, steady hand. Thank you, Trevor. Not just for the plan, for how you talk about it. You didn't make me afraid of money. You made me respect it. He laughed, eyes bright. Money's like fire, Harrison. It can heat the whole house, or burn it down, depending on how you use it. And peace. Peace is the sweetest trap for someone who suffered. Don't let comfort make you forget where you came from. That line stayed with me a long time. Toward evening, I sat by my apartment window and watched the sunset pour over the city. Down on the street, traffic flowed and young people hurried with their jobs, their phones, their dreams. I felt different. No need to chase. No need to prove anything. I took out my notebook and wrote a few lines to myself. When we're poor, we learn to survive. When we have enough, we must learn to live decently. Peace isn't lying still. It's knowing what you're holding and for whom. I set the notebook next to Arthur's photo. In it, he was smiling, gentle, a little tired, but unusually bright. I whispered, I chose like you would, Dad. No going Ellen, no waste. I'll keep half to live and half to remember. Outside, the lights along the avenue blinked on. I drew a long breath as a steadier kind of peace settled into my heartbeat. This time, it wasn't the peace of giving up. It was disciplined peace. A peace built from memory, gratitude, and signatures that carry responsibility. I thought the line, "You won't get a dime," would end that meeting. But it didn't. Seconds after I said it, Caleb slammed his palm on the table so hard, the water glass jumped, droplets spraying the rim. "We have rights," he snarled, each word tight with anger. "What do you think, Dad? We're your blood. That money should belong to this family." I sat still, saying nothing. His eyes were wide with fury, while Damon kept his head down, voice shaking, but softer, wetter. "I don't want the money, Dad. I just want you." It sounded gentle, but I looked at his hands, fingers clenched around his phone, thumbs stroking the lit screen, a drafted message unsent. I understood. For months of silence said more than any apology. If they'd meant it, they wouldn't have left me in a damp little room all winter, or left their father to drive 12 hours a day for a cheap, hot meal. I drew a slow breath, my voice calm, but hard as glass. "The shares are in my name, legal and transparent. No one has a claim but me, just like before. You gave me no right to stay in the house your mother left to you. Isn't that true?" Caleb gave a short, bitter laugh. "This is revenge." "No," I said. "If I wanted revenge, I'd make sure you felt it. I don't need to." Damon stared at the table and murmured, "I know we were wrong. We just didn't expect everything to change so fast. I miss Mom. I miss you, too." I looked at him and felt myself soften. Then the old pictures returned, crystal clear. The damp room, the mold smell rising from the walls, nights of cold canned beans, because I couldn't afford hot food. Every morning, I left at 5 a.m., hands on a steering wheel for 12 hours, fing strangers for a few bucks. Meanwhile, my son, the one saying he just wants Dad, never once picked up the phone. I spoke slowly, each word heavy as stone. "When I was in that room, where were you? When your mother's birthday came last year, did either of you call? Or did you just post nice words online about the greatest woman, and go out for a fancy dinner?" Caleb went quiet. Damon pressed his lips together. I knew I was saying the hard thing, but some wounds fester if you don't open them. "Forgiveness," I said, looking them in the eye, "doesn't mean forgetting. It means I choose not to let the past control the present. If you truly want to fix this, do what words can't. Prove it with your actions." I stood up. The restaurant felt heavy with silence. Mexican music kept playing, but far away. I set down money for my share of the meal and said quietly, "This isn't punishment. It's a boundary. I'm still your father, but you'll have to learn how to be men." I walked away without looking back. The door swung open and a gust of wind rushed in with the smell of chiles and the jingle of the doorbell. I heard Damon say something behind me, voice tight, but I didn't stop. Sometimes, leaving is the only way to keep your heart intact. That afternoon, Nashville was sunlit, the asphalt shining like glass. I drove slowly past the old neighborhood where our house used to be. The place had new doors and fresh paint. No trace of Maryland, no pot of purple geraniums on the sill. I idled a few seconds, then pulled away. Not every place we called home still has room for us. Back at my apartment, I hung up my coat and stepped onto the balcony. A light breeze, the scent of coffee from the cup on the table mixing with warm wood. I sat, poured a little more, and lifted it like a private ritual for heavy days. Sunset poured honey gold across the city. I set two photos in front of me. Marilyn in her white wedding dress and Arthur, my father, standing beside Bernard, both of them smiling. The three people I owe most in this life, now held in frames. I spoke softly, slow and low, like not to break the air. "Marilyn, Dad, today I met with my boys. They still haven't learned that family can't be bought. I tried to stay calm the way you taught me, Dad, and I chose dignity instead of buying love back." I looked down at the coffee, steam curled up in a thin ribbon. In that moment, I felt Bernard's last words cut clear. Kindness has a longer memory than money. So does dignity. It needs no audience, only the courage not to trade it away. Night fell, and the streets quieted. I turned off the lights and let the moon spill in. It was so still I could hear the clock tick, each beat like my own breath. I got into bed and pulled up the covers, a strange feeling settling into my chest. Not happiness, not sadness, just a clean kind of freedom. No more waiting to be understood. No more trying to save what doesn't want saving. I've done my part. Loved, endured, forgiven. The rest I'll let time handle. Before I closed my eyes, I turned toward Marilyn's photo on the nightstand. In the dim light, her face looked gentle, smiling. I whispered, "You see, we're still here. I didn't lose myself, even if everything else changed." Then, like a prayer, I choose dignity, not buying back affection. I closed my eyes and let go. Outside, night wind moved through the trees, drifting wet grass into the room. For the first time in months, I slept without nightmares. No shouting, no old house, No image of me standing outside in the rain. Just the quiet of someone who has chosen the right line between love and self-respect. One morning at the end of March, a thick envelope arrived. Silver Whitlow Textiles logo embossed on it. Inside was the formal invitation to the annual shareholders meeting with a detailed schedule. 9:00 a.m. next Monday in the auditorium on the 18th floor. The floor where Bernard had sat for nearly half a century. Under the new chairman's signature was a line in italics. We are honored to introduce Mr. Harrison Cole, the lawful heir of Arthur Cole, as an official shareholder of Whitlow Textiles. I read slowly, pride and humility rising together. 60 years after my father left the mill, they would say his name again. Not as an anonymous mechanic, but as the man who laid the first stone of a legacy. That evening, Martin called. His voice was calm as ever, but warmer. Harrison, this is a big event, but I want you to remember one thing. Keep your remarks brief. Focus on voting and listening. Let them feel your presence. You don't have to prove anything. I laughed. Afraid I'll talk too much. Martin chuckled. No. I just know sometimes quiet earns more attention than any speech. You don't have to stand up. Just be there. Monday morning, I arrived early. The Whitlow Textiles building rose over downtown Nashville, glass reflecting the spring sky. Inside, the lobby was carpeted in pale blue, polished wood, carrying a hint of citrus. The receptionist took my name badge, bowed slightly, and said kindly, "Welcome, Mr. Cole. We're honored." Mr. Cole sounded strange, like she was speaking to my father. I smiled and stepped into the wood-paneled elevator with a soft crowd murmur around me. When the doors opened on the 18th floor, I saw a brass plaque with Bernard Whitlow's name under the words, "Integrity is the finest fabric we weave." The auditorium glowed, glass walls overlooking the city. About 50 people were already seated, most in gray or black suits, laptops open, papers squared. Martin signaled me to the second row beside him, and Trevor. When the new chairman began, all eyes lifted. The opening remarks were crisp last year's results. European growth, plans to expand in Asia. Then he paused, looked down at us, and smiled. Before we continue, I want to introduce a special guest, a name Whitlow Textiles will always remember. Please welcome Mr. Harrison Cole, son of Arthur Cole, the man who helped save this company in 1965. Applause spread across the room longer than I expected. I stood and nodded. No one knew the whole story, but they knew that without Arthur Cole, many of them might not be there today. I looked around and saw a few moved faces, especially the older ones who might have heard their fathers talk about the mechanic back then. When the clapping faded, Martin leaned over and whispered, "Good. Now, just listen and remember what truly matters." The meeting went on. After the financials, they introduced me to the operations team, the heads of supply chain, labor, and standards. I'm not good at business talk, but I know how to listen. When they discussed expansion in India and Vietnam, I raised my hand. In those plants, do workers earn a living wage or just the minimum? And are safety protocols, especially for women, independently audited? The room paused for a few seconds. The youngest executive, a woman named Sarah, scribbled fast, then answered, "Thank you. That's the right question. We're working with international labor groups, and we'll send you a detailed report." I nodded and asked again, "And emissions from dyeing? What's the plan to reduce them? The waste lingers for a long time." I watched a creek in Tennessee change color because of a plant like that. Silence deepened a notch. Trevor sat beside me with a pleased smile. I wasn't lecturing. I was reminding them of something simple. A company survives because of people, not just profit. When I sat down, the chairman looked my way and nodded. "We'll take that seriously. Mr. Cole, thank you for naming what's easiest to forget." During the break, Trevor gave me an update. We placed the 15% at a better price than expected. Buyers are long-term funds, not traders. You still hold the other 15% steady, reliable dividends. I nodded at ease. He opened another folder. Voice lighter. "One more thing. I think you'll want a dividend charity fund. We can earmark a fixed share each year. Say 10% of your dividends for scholarships, housing, or worker support programs across the system. If you like, we can call it the Arthur Fund." I went still. That name rang like a bell from far away. I nodded. "Do it, Trevor. If my father were here, he'd smile." Near the end, the chairman turned back to me with a grin. "Mr. Cole, if you don't mind, we'd like to hang a photo of Arthur Cole in our Hall of Honor, where founders and major partners are recognized. Could you share a suitable picture?" It took me a few seconds to answer. My throat had tightened. "I have one. He's standing with Bernard Whit, both of them grinning, hands still greasy. No office shots. I think that one is the truest." The room held its breath. Then, applause rose again. Real warm, even. I looked up and saw someone wipe their eyes. For a moment, I could almost see Bernard at the back row, nodding gentle and proud. When the meeting ended, I stepped outside. Late sunlight hid the glass and lit the metal letters. Whitlow Textiles. A light breeze carried the scent of new fabric and the faraway hum of mills. I stood there staring up a tower that stood for thousands of people, and for 2 men now gone. My life had come full circle. From the man pushed out of his house to the man who can walk proudly into a place bearing his father's name. From the shame of poverty to the ease of someone who only wants to live true. I no longer felt like a shareholder or an heir. I was just a son keeping a promise for his father, holding on to the integrity he once wore with greasy hands and a clean heart. As I left the gates, sunlight fled off a car window, bright as a mirror. My face looked back older, steadier, no longer trembling, and I knew for the first time in a long time I was standing exactly where I belonged. Not in the old house, not in a shabby room, not behind a cracked steering wheel. Here, where past, justice, and continuity meet. I looked up at the sky and said softly, "Dad, Bernard, we did it." The wind passed, light as a nod. After the shareholders' meeting, my days felt different. Everything had found a rhythm. Investments steady, dividends regular, but there was still a space in me. One morning, watching the sun spill across the balcony, I thought of the old man who handed me a new beginning, Bernard Whitlow, and my father who gave up everything without asking for it back. I asked myself, if Dad were here, what would he do with this money? The answer came quickly. He'd give, but he'd give in a way that helped people stand, not kneel. So, in early April, I started what my father would have done long ago. I registered the Arthur Cole Foundation, a small fund with a clear goal to help abandoned or homeless seniors reclaim shelter, hot meals, and the dignity to live the rest of their lives. Trevor and Martin helped with every legal step. Trevor drafted the first bylaws. Martin combed through every rule to get official recognition. The day I signed Harrison Cole Founder, my hand shook a little, but my heart warmed. That name wasn't just my father's. It was a bridge between 2 generations of kindness. I shared the idea with Whitlow's board. To my surprise, they agreed to cover part of the first year's operating costs and pledged communication support. A month later, the foundation had a small office on the ground floor of a red brick building that used to be a fabric warehouse. I kept it simple. A wooden table, a few folding chairs, a coffee machine, and a plaque that read, Arthur Cole Foundation. Every home with a key is a new beginning. We designed 3 core programs: dignity housing, temporary shelter for homeless seniors, a hot meal each night, partnerships with church kitchens to serve balanced meals, the legal hand, a team of volunteer attorneys who advise seniors, help them reclaim pension benefits and documents, and handle disputes. Each year, one allocate a fixed share of dividends, about 10% as the operating budget. No fundraising drives, no mass donations. I want this foundation to stand on its own resources, just like my father did. Quiet but durable. Trevor calls it disciplined kindness. He smiled. Most people do charity to be seen. You do it to be heard, to hear your own heart rest. I just nodded. The foundation doesn't make noise, but every day we process dozens of cases. Some were teachers, some carpenters, some just fathers their children left behind in a hospital. I read every story, and in every wrinkled face, I see another version of myself. The man who once stood on a street with an old suitcase, not knowing where he'd sleep that night. One afternoon, we went to survey an old motel on the city's southern edge. Low buildings, rusted tin roofs, yellowed walls. In the last room down the hall, I met Mr. Lawrence, 82, widowed, with 2 children overseas, who no longer called. He lay on a torn mattress, a blanket thin as paper. When he heard we'd help him move to a new place, he sat up, stared at me, then burst into tears. I don't need much. I just need a real bed and a lock so they can't throw me out anymore. The next week, when we brought him to his new room, small but clean, with a bed, a fridge, and a window that caught the sun, his hands trembled as he took the key. I wrapped his fingers around the lock and said, "Now you have a home, Mr. Lawrence." He sobbed and hugged me tight, tears soaking my shoulder. "Son," he choked out, "thank you. Now I have a bed." In that moment, I understood money is only a tool. Dignity is the goal. The foundation grew faster than expected. After 3 months, we were working with 6 local churches, 2 soup kitchens, and a team of young volunteer attorneys. Martin recommended. They came on weekends, asked for no pay, only the chance to restore a little justice for someone. One afternoon as I was filing papers, a young attorney said to me, "Mr. Cole, My dad worked at Whitlow. You know, every time he mentioned Arthur Cole, he'd say if it weren't for that mechanic, we might never have had jobs. Me, working here, it's how I pay that debt back. I smiled, feeling my eyes sting. Kindness really does make a full circle, maybe 6 decades late. But it returns. I spend weekend mornings visiting every site myself. In each home, each kitchen, I meet familiar eyes. The eyes of people who'd lost faith and just found a little warmth again. An old woman sits on a wooden chair, hands trembling around a hot bowl of soup. An old man quietly smooths hair gone white, and whispers, "Thank you." I thought no one remembered me. Those simple words, way more than any prophet. I remember my father saying, when you can help someone stand without making them feel ashamed, that's when you understand the real value of money. Now I understand. That night, I came home exhausted but peaceful. I opened a cabinet and set 2 framed photos, Marilyn and Arthur, side by side on the bookshelf. The bare wall suddenly felt alive. In the warm light, their faces seemed to glow, gentle and calm. I sat down, poured myself tea, and kept quiet. Outside, the city slept. In that stillness, I heard it more clearly than ever. The sound of goodness taking root. It isn't loud like the old looms, not bright like the lights of a hall. It's as soft as the tick of a clock. Steady, persistent, true. I looked at the 2 photos and smiled. Dad, Marilyn, I found what matters most. Not money, not status, but how to use them so I no longer feel alone. Then I switched off the light. In the soft dark moonlight brushed both frames, dim and breathing. And I knew that even though they're gone, they're still here in every home with a key. In every hot meal, in every breath of kindness. Time moved on, and everything settled into a slow, complete rhythm. The Arthur Cole Foundation ran smoothly, and each week I received a brief report. How many people housed? How many meals served? How many cases closed? Trevor and Martin kept walking with me to Friends for these late chapters. No big speeches needed. One morning, Martin arrived with a thick file and said, "It's time, Harrison. Your will and the Friends' trust." I nodded, not surprised. He laid out each step, how the foundation would keep running after I'm gone. Guardrails so no one could change its purpose. And a list of independent overseers. I want to make sure the Arthur Cole Foundation lives longer than you, longer than me. No one will be able to turn it into an empty name. I felt grateful and lighter. It was the one thing left to settle. Trevor followed with another report. The portfolio is complete. I fully diversified treasuries, retirement funds, and social investments. Risk is close to zero. Principal protected returns enough to sustain the foundation indefinitely. Everything transparent. No hidden commissions. I laughed. "You've made it tidier than I ever could." "No," Trevor said. "I'm just helping you keep your promise." That afternoon, a text came from Caleb. Short, no period. "Dad, how are you? I want to meet." I sat with the screen for a long time, then replied with 3 lines. "We meet only if you're honest, if you apologize for real, and if you show long-term actions. Those 3 or don't bother." No reply came. I didn't wait. Forgiveness isn't reopening an old door. It's locking it properly, so people know crossing that threshold takes more than tears. That night, I wrote a letter sent to no one tucked in a drawer beside the 2 photos. In it, I retold how everything began. Arthur, my father, met Bernard in a Nashville bar in 1965. 2 men, one rich, one poor, made a promise on a napkin. 60 years later, I'm the one keeping it. I didn't just receive money. I received responsibility. And I want my children to know, money only means something when it's placed in the hands of someone who will use it for what's right. I folded the letter and set it beside the foundation's first bank statement. A note to whoever comes next, whether they read it or not. A week later, I went back to City General Hospital, the place where Bernard once gripped my hand. I sat on a metal chair in the lobby, cold but gleaming. People passed, shoes and voices mixing with the beeps of monitors down the hall. I closed my eyes, let the sounds blend, and whispered, "Dad, Bernard, I've paid the debt the way you wanted." When I opened them, the lobby TV was running a short piece. Whitlow Textiles Fund, City General's Geriatrics Unit, through the Arthur Cole Foundation. I smiled, not because my name appeared, but because the old promise was finally whole. Before leaving, I stopped by administration and signed the funding receipt. As my pen lifted, I felt as if I'd put down a stone I'd carried for half a century. That night, I stood on my balcony and watched the city glow like a golden rug. Roads crossed, headlights streamed a river of real lives, each with its own promise. On the small table, my phone still glowed, the rideshare app open, though I no longer needed it. I looked at it once more and slid my finger right to shut it down. The screen went dark, and I knew I'd never open it again. At 70, I finally had permission to rest, not because of money, but because I owed nothing to the past. I lifted my eyes to the night. In the breeze, I could almost hear Arthur's laugh and Marilyn's voice. "You did well, Harry." I smiled and set a hand over my heart, where it kept its steady beat. Inside me, there's a safe you can't see, not holding cash or shares, but promises, gratitude, and dignity. If you're still here with me, thank you. Truly, not everyone has the patience to walk with an old man through his life losses, wounds, and the small seeds of goodness left in this world. But you stayed, and that alone gives this story meaning. Tell me, where are you listening from? A small town, a city of lights, or a quiet room like mine once was? If this story touched you, share one kind thing you've done or received. Who knows? Your small story might plant a good seed for someone who needs hope, and hit subscribe, so I have a reason to keep telling the journey of the Arthur Cole Foundation, where every home with a key begins with a generous count. Subscribe to Astral Vengeance. Thank you, family.